An art critic once stated, "The Indian which Mr. Couse presents is neither the rampant warrior nor the crushed and apologetic being who is sometimes visualized as the true type of this vanishing race. Indeed, the Couse paintings represent a group of sturdy, primitive people at Taos, New Mexico, who are refusing to vanish with the timorous and apathetic haste which tradition has assigned to them." It would be impossible to estimate just how much of the growing popular interest in the Pueblo Indians of New Mexico and Arizona is due to the work of the American artists who are painting these picturesque types and discovering for the American public new and appealing characteristics of their culture. But it is obvious that the work of these painters has had a tremendous influence on the world's recognition of the ancient people of America. Eanger Irving Couse was born in Saginaw, Michigan, on September 3, 1866. Very early in his youth he befriended the Chippewa people that lived close by. His keen interest in Native American culture continued to grow, as did his desire to draw and paint. At age 16 he left to study at the Art Institute of Chicago, following 2 years at the National Academy of Design in New York City. By 1886, Couse sought further training in Paris at Academie Julian. He developed quickly under William Bouguereau and Tony Robert Fleury, gaining recognition and winning prizes for his work. In the fall of 1887, he was introduced to Virginia Walker, an art student from the state of Washington, who had come to Paris to study illustration, and they decided to marry in Paris in 1889. Couse desired to paint a major Indian picture for the Paris Salon. Virginia convinced her husband to return to America and live for a year on her family's ranch in Washington, where he could find Indian models. His subject was The Captive, based on an incident associated with the Whitman massacre. It was shown in the Paris Salon of 1892 and currently hangs in the Phoenix Art Museum. His wife and a local Indian were his models. Back in France, the Couses moved in 1893 to Étaples, a small fishing village and art colony on the coast of Picardy. They remained there for 3 years, while he painted French peasants and fisherfolk. Their son, Kibbe, was born in Étaples. Returning to America, in 1898, the Couses established a winter studio in New York, but summers were spent away from the city, painting in Washington, Connecticut, and France. Couse learned of Taos in May of 1902 through a conversation with his friend, Ernest Blumenschein. 2 weeks later, Couse arrived in northern New Mexico with his family to begin a lifetime of summer residency and the development of the oeuvre for which he became famous. He was one of the founders of the Taos Society of Artists in 1915 and its first president. A painter of Native Americans in Taos, he established a permanent studio and followed his passion. The Pueblo Indian, being less of a fighter and wanderer than were the fierce plains tribes, has adjusted with comparative ease to the restrictions placed upon him. From Mr. Couse's richly coloured canvases, he looks out upon the world with much of the same tranquil appreciation of a simpler life and surroundings to his liking. The slender, light-trunked aspens of the mountains around Taos form decorative backgrounds for some of Mr. Couse's most poetic paintings. The idyllic quality of nature and the Pueblo people is a thing that this artist treats understandingly, and he says that the people of the land are keeping their cultural poetry in spite of the seeming changes to some of the more prosaic ways of modern man. The Indian is losing many distinctive traits, and is of course in danger of abandoning much of his ethnic craft, his songs, poetry, and ceremonies, though artists who appreciate the value and significance of these are making every effort to encourage their preservation. In his Kachina Painter, Mr. Couse represents a modern Indian painting on a wall, one of the sacred symbols of his ancestors. In other works, similarly, we find Couse is searching out the mannerisms and customs of the Pueblo people to portray a rich and proud heritage. Colourful names are full of significance to the Pueblo people and suggest his love of the natural phenomena about him. Rushing wind, flying eagle, or similar epithets still seem appropriate Indian terms by which to designate a young man, even though he may be known in English as Gold-Tooth John or Blackfoot Charlie. Mr. Couse, who is given to wearing a green sweater and who has a comfortable stoutness of figure, is called by his Taos models Green Mountain. Other artists are humorously, appropriately, and unflatteringly named as well. Mr. Couse's home in Taos has been made from a quaint old Mexican convent, and the original architecture has been carefully preserved. A perfect type of the old Spanish doorway, with a mission bell in the open belfry, admits one to the long L-shaped porch, with its vines, hollyhocks, and splendid view of the valley and mountains to the east and south, thick adobe walls, Indian rugs and pottery, and the vast open spaces of sunlit New Mexico make this vine-covered porch an ideal retreat from the drowsy life of the village, beyond the old Spanish doorway. Painting pictures seems the only really appropriate occupation in a place like this. The charming interior has been kept spacious, and Spanish and an especially fine studio is provided, where Mr. Couse works for at least 6 months every year. Many secret ceremonies are held in the assembly room of the Pueblo, and marriages that have been solemnized by a Catholic priest are done over in traditional Indian form. Clans are kept distinct and ancient religious rituals are preserved. Mr. Couse has balanced his life and picture-making very well. Irving Couse has left a lasting tribute to the people of the land, and paintings that provide us with a lasting view into the past for future generations to come. Thank you, and consider subscribing for future presentations.